Well, welcome everyone to our final budget presentation. We do intend to have future presentations, but it will be more about the future of North, structure, and so on. So Terrence is going to wrap everything up for us, and we are going to leave time for questions. And if I'm not mistaken, Terrence, the back is going to talk at the end of your presentation as well, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So you'll get to hear from the budget committee to give you a brief overview of their recommendations. So we will go ahead and get started. Terrence, you have the floor.
Okay, well, we'll get started with the land acknowledgement, and Andre has the floor.
On behalf of North Seattle College, we acknowledge that we occupy the traditional ancestry lands of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish tribe. The people that are still here continue to honor and bring light into their ancient heritage. Without them, we would have access to this gathering, dialogue, learning, and Zoom space. We ask that you take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land who are still here.
Thank you, Andre. I want to start by talking about the feeling that I think all of us have. Disorientation, confusion, lots of questions. And in this situation right now with the budget and everything, I'm going to be presenting you with some fairly definitive numbers, pulling all these pieces together with some range of uncertainty. And I guess that would be my sort of theme to you, as we are in a really uncertain time. And so as we plan and make decisions based on the BAC's recommendations and so on, we're setting a direction, or we will be setting a direction. But there's going to be lots of possibilities of course correction, because at the end of the day, we have a structural deficit. But in the words of Anthony Fauci, the virus decides. The COVID virus is going to decide a lot of dynamics. First one of those being state obviously has a revenue shortfall, big one. Is Congress going to backstop that? And that's all because of COVID. Our students, enrollment is a key part of our financial equation. We don't have a sense yet, are actually more going to enroll because unemployment's so high, or are fewer going to enroll because COVID? So these things will start becoming clearer to us early in the fall, or actually next week when we get our first sort of apples to apples snapshot of fall enrollment. And so we're moving forward as best we can, knowing that there are a lot of variables they're transitioning. So I just want to acknowledge the tentative nature of everything we're doing and the uncertainty and the difficulty of that. That said, I'm going to talk about three things today, three deficits and their implications. And at the end, there will be a report from BAC. So we've talked before about how what we've been experiencing has been a drop in enrollment, pretty steep one, which has driven revenue down a lot. But at the same time, our expenses have been going up. Not a lot, but a lot relative to our revenue. And the net effect of that has been that our expense per FTE enrolled has gone up. Totally aside from COVID, we're losing 6.5. We will, based on the current budget, lose $6.5 million this coming year that we're in. Now, if you add COVID-19, we are talking about a $10.25 million deficit. This assumes that the state reduces the money it provides to us by 15%. Those two deficits we've talked about from the beginning. The third deficit is the one that I want to talk about a little more today, because it's really important. And we are now in our 50th anniversary. The buildings we have were built 50 years ago, and a lot of the furniture and fixtures and equipment in those buildings may not be 50 years old, but it's pretty darn old. It's certainly, if you walk through, it is not 5 years old. Some places like OC-E&E, it may be, but for the most part, it's closer to the 50-year mark than the 5-year mark. And so what we have is a maintenance deficit, because we have not been replacing, renewing, and that type of thing. And you see it in the form of really tired looking chairs. Sometimes the the covers are coming off, just ADA problems, all that type of thing. And we have a lot of facilities. We have 113 classrooms. We have 42 labs. We have 430 offices, which is a figure that still boggles my mind, and 180,000 square feet of carpeted public space. So I'm not talking about the offices. I'm talking about spaces like the area outside registration, which, by the way, interesting conversation. I was saying to Odessa, you know, we really need to take advantage of this quiet time here and really do some deep cleaning. So I want to see those carpets cleaned. And her response was to me was, well, Terrence, we can't deep clean those carpets because if we do and we add water, the remaining adhesive will come off and the carpets will start to bunch and buckle and people will trip and fall on them. So that was a bit of an eye-opener to me, at least. So when we look at that maintenance deficit, we can't just continue not doing things, not replacing things. Things are breaking, and it's creating, or will over time, in the not so distant future, create a situation where our facilities become less and less attractive and students begin to simply not want to be here. So we've been looking at the maintenance needs over the next 6 years to try to catch up and bring North's physical plan up to a level where things are attractive and fresh and not broken and consistent and that type of thing. And this is not a precise number, but the thought was that if we were to look at our facilities, about 75% of them are really quite old. The furniture, fixtures, equipment, and everything is really quite old. 25% is relatively recent, the last decade or so. So if we were to try to catch up with all that maintenance, we would want to, over the next 6 years, refresh 75% of our classrooms, 75% of our labs, 60% of our offices, and all of the public area carpeting, because it's all, 6 years from now, carpet that's already been down 12 years will be 18 years old, which is a long time for a carpet. Now, the thing is that we are actually doing this sort of renewal takes staff. You have to have people who, move the furniture out. You have to have people to plan this stuff, all this stuff. And we frankly don't have the staffing capacity to do this level of renewal. We just can't do it. We don't have the staffing. So we proposed more modest plans to the Budget Advisory Committee, which is which is over the course of the next 6 years to replace about a quarter of the equipment and furniture and fixtures and repaint and that type of thing, rewire in the classrooms and in the labs, only less than 20% of the offices, and only about half of the public area carpeting. So really dial back on what we think would be ideal to much less. And what that means is that the cycle, the length of time it will take us to replace anything you see here right now will be 25 years for a classroom. In other words, if a classroom has furniture that's 20 years old now, it'll be 45 years old by the time we get to replace the last classroom. Obviously, we try to kind of stagger it so that the oldest classrooms get done first. But nonetheless, we're talking about a 25-year cycle for classrooms, a 35-year cycle for offices, and 11 years for carpets in the public area. So that is what I would call sort of a minimalist approach. It should, it doesn't put us in great shape, but it doesn't have us just totally declining. So what does that all add up to in terms of cost? Well, it's about $12.9 million. So it's a fair chunk of change. And it boils down to about $2 million a year for the next 6 years. And, into perpetuity, essentially, because that's what it's going to take to just keep things being replaced about every 25 years. You may ask, well, where's that money going to come from? Because we're running a deficit. And the answer, at least in the short term, has to be from our reserves. So what is our reserve situation? Well, let me give you a picture of all the funds we have. So this is the breakdown of what we call fund balance. Fund balance basically is the difference between what you have in assets versus the liabilities you have against those assets. So what you have is cash in the bank. A liability means a bill you haven't paid yet. It's not, what you have is also not just cash in the bank, it's money you are owed. So, you know, we billed somebody, they owe us money, we count that as an asset. So in total, if you look at the entire college and say, by how much do our assets exceed our liabilities, we have almost $26 million in what they call total fund balance. You can think of that as cash. It's not really cash. Cash is actually different, but for simplification in terms of the way we think of this, think of that as cash. Of that, that's all our money, all the money we keep track of. And that includes things like financial aid, which clearly we cannot use because that's for the students, right? That's grants, monies, et cetera. We can't touch that. It also includes things like S&A, which is the student activities fee, which we, the college, cannot use directly because the students have financial control over that. So we have this notion of something called unrestricted funds. These are funds that we can use based on our own decision-making power. And our fund balances at the end of 2019-20, which is to say June 30th, 2020, was $14 million. Now that's like everything, right? That we can actually use as we choose, so to speak. There are purposes for those funds, but we have flexibility, legal authority, for want of a better word, to use those as we choose. We designate some of those funds for reserves. Now, I expected to see a lot of money designated for reserves, as symbolized by the code RSVE, which says reserve, right? There are only $641,000 in accounts labeled RSVE, which is to say not enough accounts have been labeled and there hasn't been a reserve plan here for all intents and purposes. But the bottom line here, and I'm doing really round numbers, is that our current unrestricted fund balance is approximately the same amount as our maintenance needs over the next 6 years. So that's, you know, it says, hey, you actually don't have, you can't really, you've got very little flexibility. And so this $12.9 million plan to replace things every 25 years or so was brought to the Budget Advisory Committee, and you'll hear more about that this afternoon or later after this presentation. But they decided that that needed to be reduced because we have so many other needs. It's not that the needs aren't there, but let's reduce it by 50%. So what does that mean? And this is a round number. Their actual number is a little different. It's a round number. What does that mean? Well, what it means is that we are committing to a 50-year replacement cycle. That is to say that we won't replace things and renew our classrooms for 50 years. I mean, when I say that, you know, it'll take 50 years to get through all of them and then start over. That's half a century. This is the length of time North has been in existence. So, you know, there you go. That will leave us, if we take that recommendation, that will leave us with $8.7 million in what I'll call operational reserves. In other words, the money that we can theoretically use to draw down on when we are running a deficit, so we can hopefully adjust with less pain to need to get to a financially sustainable place. Now, the COVID deficit, which is to say the deficit if the state cuts our funding by 15% because its revenue has fallen off a cliff, equals an $850,000 a month loss. So this month, we will spend $850,000 more than we bring in from the state and from tuition and students and so on. So that's a pretty big loss. So that $8.7 million in operational reserves, how far will it take us? When do we run out of this $8.7 million in the COVID scenario? So this worst case scenario where the state cuts our funding by 15% because they have no revenue, or not no revenue, because they have a drop in revenue and Congress has decided not to help the states, which I'm still hoping they will, and we do nothing. In other words, we don't try to reduce our budget or anything at all. How much cash do we have left at the end of each month? Well, we start with how much we're spending each month, which is at $800 and some thousand. And this is the line of what happens to our fund balance. We start at the end of July with a little less than $8 million at the end of July. And we run out of money in April. Our wallet is empty. We have nothing left. We can't pay our bills, which includes payroll, if we don't make some big changes. The board is due to make its decision on the budget proposals that first the BAC, then the executive committee, then the president, then the chancellor's executive committee, then the chancellor, kind of go through all of those. And then in October, the board is going to make its decision and we'll find out what they decide. But by that point, we'll already be down, if we hadn't made any changes, to about $5 million in sort of an operating reserve. The good news is we have been making some changes. So this is a quick summary. First of all, the district itself, that over $8 million a year, is what we pay to the district for its services. And they've committed to cutting 15%, which is about $1.2 million annually, but they're not cutting it, like they didn't already cut it July 1. They're cutting it a little later. So $1 million this year. Food service closure, it will save us about $300,000 a year, but $200,000 this year because we have some closing costs and so on. And then there were other self-support positions that we had to terminate that will save us about $300,000 a year annually, and $315,000 this year. Now, why is this one sort of the opposite of the others, where you're saving more this year than in the future? And the reason is because those layoffs, a good chunk of them were for businesses that will come back. So we'll bring some people back, sort of in the long run. So that's $1.8 million so far, right? So that's a good bite into that deficit. That leaves us $4.7 to $8.5 million to go. The 4.7 number being the structural deficit, the 8.5 being the COVID deficit, so to speak. The district has enacted furloughs. Those save us about $91,000 a day, and for each furlough day, right? It's $91,000. And we have non-personnel expenses that are relatively small as a total proportion of our budget, and they're kind of sticky, but if we were able to reduce those by 10%, which is a fairly aggressive number because there's some that really can't be changed. So, for example, electricity, wastewater, water, and that type of thing. We really have very limited ability to reduce those. But together, between the furloughs and the non-personnel reductions, we may be able to save another $825,000, which takes us to the point where we have $3.9 to $7.8 million in reductions to go, right? So what's left to cut? Well, what's left is our $39.6 million compensation budget. Compensation is salary plus benefits. And all these things I'm talking about now, I'm not just talking about the operating budget. I'm talking about the so-called all funds budget, every single budget across the board. So that budget breaks down basically like this. So what you'll see on the far left is the employee type, so the type of employee, the employee classification, the amount budgeted for salaries in that classification, then the benefits associated with those classifications, and total compensation, followed by the estimated compensation per FTE. Now that's the combination of salary and benefits. So that includes people's health benefits, the retirement benefits, workman's compensation, and Social Security, right? That's all part of the benefits package, and it's all the cost that the college bears. And so that's the compensation per FTE that you see up here. One note, as you scan down this, you'll see, wow, this is, there's some spreads there, obviously. In the full-time faculty and the part-time faculty, those numbers, I think, are roughly accurate. But because of the way, how should I put it, things are coded between stipends and reassign time and this and that, they might fudge 5% one direction or the other. So I just want you to know that. But this is a picture that I'll explain the reason for it in a moment. And then on the far right, you see the percentage of this entire compensation budget that falls under each category of or type of employee. So you can see that the faculty are about half of the total compensation, and then it spreads across the rest fairly evenly with classified staff, of course, being the next largest major classification. So so we have to reduce our spending to match our revenue, not like overnight, but before we run out of money. So in the worst case scenario, if we reduce expenses across employee categories or employee types proportionally, this is what it looks like. So here's the amount of money in each category, is the second column. And the third column is the number of FTE that we would need to reduce by in order to hit that targeted amount. So when I say proportional cuts, there's no attempt here to say, oh, this is around equity. There's no attempt around added value. It's just math. We are not going to pursue this as purely as a mathematical exercise. The goal here is to preserve the core, to do the utmost we can to limit the damage to the students' learning experience, to ensure that the front-facing parts of the institution where the students are engaged and connected and supported and become successful, that those are preserved to the extent possible. But mathematically, as you can see, this is how it breaks down, and it totals 83 FTE. Now, you can think of that as 83 individuals. But the fact is, among part-time faculty, you know, they're teaching 1 or 2 classes. It could be more individuals affected, but we're talking about 83 in the worst case scenario as we understand it right now. I don't want to dwell too long on this one because it's too depressing. Not that the next case, the best case, is not you know, roses and everything, but if we were to do proportional cuts and just deal with the structural deficit that we have, this is what it would, again, mathematically break down to, which is 42 FTE. And you're again looking at, you know, you think of that in terms of people. It's more than that many people affected. So that is the situation. And we have just, we meaning the executive team, we just received the recommendations from the Budget Advisory Committee, and I think Andre and Sarush may be sharing some sort of high-level perspective on that with you. And I think it's fair to say that as they looked at the reductions that were being proposed in order, not because, hey, we want to do this, but because, okay, if we need to reduce expenses by 25%, for example, this is what we would need to do to accomplish that goal. And individual deans and directors and vice presidents went through that exercise, and they submitted their plans for that. And in some cases, things were doable. But in other cases, while they were mathematically doable, in other words, you could zero out a position or basically zero out an expense and you can get to the target number, as a practical matter, in terms of how things would be affected operationally or from a student learning perspective, they were frankly not practical. You go from cutting, you know, skin to cutting flesh to cutting bone. And that's my way of saying here that we are in the process of having to make some really difficult decisions, which are going to be disruptive and painful and problematic. And at the same time, we are not going to be able to, as an institution, take care of this ourselves because the problem is bigger than North. The problem is way bigger than North. There are some, we've structured ourselves based on a much higher revenue base than we have. And I think this is not just true for North, it's true for South and it's true for Central. So our revenue is just, we assumed a certain stability in it and it didn't happen. And so we've structured ourselves into a higher cost structure that we just can't cut back far enough at the local level. And so what's going to need to happen is the district is going to have to look at the entire structure of the district and how the colleges interact and where responsibilities lie and where efficiencies across the district can be realized. It's not a problem we can solve here on our own. So we've been thinking a bit at the executive team level of, because this problem is bigger than us, what we need to do is figure out, can we get partway there and then more work needs to be done that's beyond us, as it were. So if we were to look at getting halfway there, in other words, cutting half of what needs to be cut in order to get to a financially sustainable operation, here's how much time we'd have left. So again, cash at the end of each month. If we got it to less than $500,000 a month in like $400,000 a month in spending beyond the revenue we bring in other words, this monthly deficit, then it would look like this. We would be able to survive until basically March of 2022, by the time we ran out of money and could no longer pay our bills. As I said earlier, the board is due to take our recommendations and make its decision about the budget for this year in October. And this buys more time, but I have a feeling that what's going to have to happen is that the board is going to have to look much more broadly, holistically. Well, let me rephrase this. They're going to need to, if they're going to fix the problem, do this. Whether they do it and when they do it, I can't tell you. So this is speculative what I'm going to do here. But I can foresee a situation where there's a big reduction in decisions in October, but then there'll be a period of rethinking of the district and the relationship with the colleges and what's a sustainable structure and how can we take advantage of the fact that we are a district and how do we manage to continue to serve the students' needs in the greater Seattle area, but do so in a way that's just more efficient. And perhaps that would be in February, I don't know.
We are scheduled to address this in January, Terrence. We are trying to wait for the legislature to meet to find out exactly what it is they are planning to do with regards to cuts and alleged cuts. And then after that, once they address this, supposedly in January, up in front of their session, then we'll start having conversations around that time about what to do and what this looks like.
Yeah. So there you go. Now this is all, you know, not exactly uplifting. Somebody asked me if I deliberately used a black background to convey a message, and that hasn't been the reason, but it's definitely not uplifting. The thing I would encourage all of us to remember is that North has been here before. Many of you were here back in 1999 when North didn't frankly have much in the way of reserves and overspent to the extent that they had about $2.5 million that they didn't have in order to pay the bills. So they ended up going, I believe, to South Seattle and borrowing that money. And then they had to come up with a plan for repaying it. And they did. And subsequently, you know, as I said, they did. And North, you know, continued. And so this is not happy news, but North has been here before and figured out a way through. And I have no doubt that haven't, you know, figured out a way through again. And with that, I'll just share my feelings and ask you if you have any questions, or perhaps it's a good time for DeAndre or Sarush to share the back information, and then you can have questions after that.
If you have questions and don't want to go live, just type them in the chat area, or if you feel comfortable going live, please do so at this point in time, and then we'll have Terrence and Sarush talk about what the back committee has recommended. Terrence, I want to thank you so very much for putting all these presentations together week after week. I know it has been a major challenge. I know that you and I have discussed all those rocks you've turned over and the voila of it all, but this is necessary for North to move forward. It's good to know. It seems like a downer, but it's good to at least know what we're dealing with. And that's half the battle in coming up with solutions. And so this has been amazing. It's not all good news, but it is, because now we know. And we're formulating ideas on what to do about it. So are there any live questions or chat questions before DeAndre and Sarush take over? Devine says, I didn't see anything about revenue. For example, you can cut 50 faculty, but you also cut the primary revenue stream. So where does that fit into the picture? And so that's, Devine, thank you for asking that question, because we wanted to make it clear that the illustration that Terrence gave us was purely numerical. It was not intended to say that we're going to approach this numerically. So as far as the revenue stream is concerned, we do recognize that, you know, faculty generate revenue. There are other areas that generate revenue as well, and so we're not gonna cut off our nose to spite our faces here. We do understand that, and that's what Terrence was talking about. But Terrence, do you want to add anything to a response to Davine's question?
I just want to say that you're absolutely right, just as Dr. Crawford said, and we are actually looking at some revenue possibilities. So, for example, the commissary kitchen that is no longer going to be used by food services, that is something that we're going to see if we can rent it out once COVID's over, right? Just today, we went to the Board of Trustees with a proposal for equipment that would allow us to basically manage things so we could do a park and ride for the pedestrian bridge, which would generate a lot of revenue, and that we would have some flexibility in spending. So we are looking at revenue. At the same time, revenue is a lot more speculative, especially in these days, than reducing expenses, and because we have a finite amount of cash in the bank.
Right, and I've asked the grants office to up their activity with regards to garnering grant resources as well. I know that takes a lot of time, but they do put a lot of time and energy into developing grants. I just went to our foundation, the North Seattle College Foundation, and they provided additional resources for faculty stipends in order to develop and implement grant resources. So that could be a form of revenue and support for us as well.
Hi, Shameen. This is Pete Lords, Vice President of Instruction. I also wanted to share to Davine's question that when the instructional deans worked on plans from their areas, I also asked that they include the anticipated revenue lost from enrollment. And so that was part of the presentation that instruction made to the Budget Advisory Committee, and part of what we talk about in executive team.
So you're on the right track, Davine, and we are very mindful of all of that. She also says that she's been here for 30 years, and the carpet in her area was old then and is even older now. I've seen admin areas upgraded more than twice. So when you chuckle at 18 years for old carpet, we laugh back at our 30-plus-year-old carpet.
You know, let me just say something about that, which is, I have no doubt you're right, because I have no doubt that some of this carpet is over 30 years old. And that one of the things Shameen and I talked about is that North has been a very ad hoc in many ways around decision making and so on. There haven't been plans and so on. So one of the things, those numbers you saw are a reflection of the beginning of a process to say, you know what, we're going to treat areas consistently. We're right now, facility staff is going through every single classroom and doing an inventory of the status, where it is, and so on, so we can prioritize and order, you know, what's in worse shape, what needs to be taken care of in a holistic way, as opposed to such and such complains more than so and so. Right. So we're trying to become more systematic, and we'll do the best we can that way.
Marla Lockhart has a great question referring to other revenues. What are the percentages of revenues compared to revenues brought by faculty? Do we know that, Terrence? And is that something
I can't give you a number, but I can tell you it's really small. I mean, our business, sorry to use that word, is educating students, and that's the business. The rest is really small, but as they say, at the margins, a small amount can make a difference if it's additive, right?
Jim Jewell would like to know what are the mechanisms for proposing innovations, whether it be how to do more with less or to highlight and improve on what we offer. I hear staff faculty ask, what can we do to make North a destination college? Pete, would you like to address that?
I know with instruction, when we talked, when all of the deans and I worked, when the instruction budget planning group worked, we talked about two other things in addition to reduction proposals. One was where are our areas for growth? Where are our areas that either are growing or we believe, based on certain data that we're seeing or trends that we're seeing in industry or transfer, that there may be potential for growth? And then we also didn't want to tamp the opportunities that maybe aren't for growth per se of existing programs, but where we could add new or what's the word I'm looking for? Reshape existing. And so there have been those conversations in instruction. There have been those conversations along with the budget reduction conversations.
Emily Rodriguez asks, are carpet and those types of improvements under the dollar amount that would be needed to get capital funding from the district?
Unfortunately, yes, they're explicitly excluded from capital funding.
Okay. Kate wants to know, when we are looking at classroom upgrades, are we considering adding ability to use video conferencing easily in the classes?
So in the original proposals that went to back, the idea was to have, I think it was 25% of the classrooms become or be converted into what I'll call classrooms of the future. So that cost was incorporated into there.
Great, and the back committee is going to need 15 minutes, so we have about 2 minutes for these additional questions. The departments in the library building are preparing for a massive lift and shift that has to happen by June 1st, 2021. Is there any chance the funding earmarked for that move will be cut or impacted?
So not directly, but indirectly. We were just told that the capital money we thought we could use to renovate the college center so that we could move the library in, we were told we can't use that money because it's not physically in the library building, even though we're having to spend the money because of the library renovation. So it's entirely possible that, I mean, this is a decision that we'll have to make, is to, you know, are we going to invest as much as we were planning to, because now it has to come out of the operational reserves of the college, because state capital won't pay for it.
And then for the last minute or so, there are a couple of questions around levies to assist the college, community contributions to assist the college, GoFundMe accounts to assist the college. And then there's a question about foundation, and I can address that one. So Terrence, do you have any comments regarding the levies or bonds or anything like that?
Only that it would be a good thing.
Yes,
So.
Absolutely. And that's something we need to address with our political hierarchy. Bonds are great for community colleges. And then finally, there is a question about the foundation, and the North Seattle College Foundation was not merged with Seattle College's foundations. South Seattle College and North Seattle College still have foundations outside of the foundation for Seattle colleges because of the complexity of the arrangements. And now that I understand our foundation better, I see why. And so as an example, that's benefiting us right now. I just made a request to the foundation, our North Seattle College Foundation, for $300,000 to assist with student infrastructure, e-learning, supporting students with the tablets and hotspots, you know, scholarship and emergency aid, faculty stipends and all of that. And they approved $300,000 for us this year. So these are the kinds of requests that will go to them moving forward. I cannot speak to what was made to them previously, but I can tell you that they were ecstatic to be able to provide us with that support. And so we've agreed to be very accountable for those dollars as well, and to make sure that they go to areas that are either supporting students or directly to students. So that was a great question, and the foundations have always been a source of confusion to my understanding in this system, but just know we do still have a North Seattle College Foundation. So on that note, don't leave, because the back committee needed these last few minutes to talk with you about their findings. Again, Terrence, thank you. Executive team members who are here and those who are not, thank you. And thank you all for hanging with us every week and asking really great questions. So DeAndre and Sarush, are you all ready?
Yes, we are ready.
Here.
Awesome.
Thank you, President. I'll share the screen. And as I'm sharing the screen, I'll say I like that comment on there, that virtual gala. Wouldn't that be nice for us to get together? But right now, I want to just definitely start off and thank the back committee members, on behalf of the president and the VPs, as we recognize all the time and the effort and commitment that, you all made towards this committee, while definitely upholding the true ethical values and commitments and confidentiality to the core of the institution and working towards leading with racial equity. So this has been a process. My colleagues are going to join in and help really do our quick recommendations. So I'll turn it right over to the co-chair, Sharush, to get us going and recognizing our phenomenal committee members that had to still be vulnerable to be the voices for our beloved community. Go ahead, Sarush.
Sure. We have 10 members on the committee, but starting with DeAndre, Vice President of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and myself as a Director of Business Office. And we have Alice Milling, who was representing Student Service Admin, and Aaron Korngebel, who was presenting Instruction Admin, and Odessa Woodley from Administrative Service. And we have Jesse Cooley, who is representing pro staff, Steve Hoffman, classified representative, and the faculty representative was Vince Offenbach. Bear Liu was appointed as a faculty by Instruction Department, and Renee Inflis was a College Council liaison for us, and Dr. Mary Jacob-Nash was exam representative for us. This was the 10 members of the committee. DeAndre?
Thank you so much. Renee?
Yeah, thank you, DeAndre. And I think I first want to thank the members of the committee trying to achieve, as Terrence mentioned, those 6.5 million in cuts. And thinking about that, it was a really challenging process. And there were many times where we were, sort of arguing many different points. And so I just want to really give acknowledgement to the committee members for all the times we met, all the times we were looking over all these budget proposals and really trying to get to where we needed to be while trying not to impact the core mission of the college. So in thinking about that, one of the things we wanted to acknowledge was that the district budget task force had already laid out some really great examples for recommendations and for how to guide us in our work. And so we took a lot of their guiding principles and incorporated that into our work. We also recognize that cutting the college budget by 15, 20, or 25% would really result in sort of very negative consequences for our students. And so we want to acknowledge that these recommendations are done with a heavy heart, and I know Terrence can really relate to that. As an example, talking about carpets, right, and how that impacts all of us and how these cuts can impact everything. We also wanted to lead with values such as equity and diversity and inclusion, and DeAndre will talk about that more later. And also, if layoffs were contemplated, that we encouraged all the leads to really look at alternative sources of funding and trying to seek out those additional revenues. And so those are some of the overarching guidelines that we were looking at as we were recommending. making our recommendations. So now to sort of present our recommendations, I'm going to turn it over to Jesse Cooley.
All right, thanks, Renee. So in addition to, and while we were reviewing the different proposals from the departments and divisions, our group came up with a list of general recommendations. I'll go over briefly, add a few other kind of caveats to these, and then let DeAndre talk about some of the actual next steps and numbers as well, given our time. So the first one is to take a phased approach. So we looked at 15, 20, and 25% cuts for all the divisions. So our recommendation is to cut 15% generally as identified by the departments and use reserve funds for some of the difference to try to get to the ultimate cut goal. And this would prolong, as Terrence showed, the reserves that we have if we need to spend some of those down as well. Number two, to consider reducing the cost allocated to the district, where the pay and the number of higher paid administrators has grown considerably over the years. At the time this was made, we did not know what cut the district was being made and if that would mirror our own cuts. And so there was a lot of discussion about wanting to make sure that that was at the number we were at, given that there is the action on campuses that is actually working with students. Not to say the district isn't, but that we were prioritizing North as well. Number three, explore ideas for additional growth and revenue. A lot of our discussion was about cuts and balancing the budget, and we needed to make sure that we gave a recommendation about how are we going to grow as the college for enrollment, how are we going to grow our revenues to get back to a more stable and prosperous reserves as well as operation as a college as a whole. So the committee hopes for number four that the district does move forward with the 15% reduction. We did see that from Terrence's presentation. That's new information. If the departments are able to forego spending funds that they have been allocated, do not punish them in future years for being fiscally conservative now. So if there's unspent money, that's not an automatic reduction for future years' budgets. Be careful about making cuts that are hard to reverse if the outlook becomes positive. We're unsure about how COVID and the recession will impact future enrollments, and we want to be, this kind of goes with number one, to be wary about how we move forward with drastic cuts. These are one-year recommendations that we're making, though several of these recommendations had a multi-year period. There's so much that's unknown at this time to make recommendations beyond that period. And as Terrence's graph showed, there's going to be other board of trustee meetings and other campus discussions in the future as well. Number eight, as some spending in 2021 fiscal year has already occurred, some of our 15%, 20 and 25% models will need to be adjusted because some of the personnel spending has already gone for several months. Number nine, prioritize preserving the jobs of people who have direct contact with students and of people who maintain functional campus infrastructure. This was supported by all of the BAC committee as well. Number 10, if layoffs are contemplated, seek alternative funding, including prudent use of college reserves as an alternative. We know there is a reserve bank there, but we cannot spend everything right away. Otherwise, we will just be prolonging drastic cuts in the future as well. Number 11, when the president releases these recommendations, that there be a tool shared with North employees to submit anonymously questions and suggestions so that more of the community conversation be considered. Then that there be clarification on anonymity protections. Number 12, thank HR for their information regarding furlough savings. As we move forward, departments should not rely heavily on a furlough approach. It may not have the impact we imagine and may cause delays in counteract cost savings. And then number 13 was very important for us to highlight. The main function of this budget advisory committee was to review documentations and make budget recommendations. Throughout the process, the committee has highly recommended that unit administrators and VPs share this information with their departments. And that communication was not the primary responsibility or the responsibility of the BAC. Instead, that was with the unit administrators putting together these proposals. And with this, I'll hand it over to DeAndre.
Many thanks, Jesse, and we'll continue. We're recognizing the time, so we'll continue. Dr. Miriam Nash is now going to explain kind of the tool that we use.
So, hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Yes, we decided on working on the impact. So we had the recommendations for cuts. And as Renee said, the departments did some presentations, and then we had to take our notes and have discussions. We used had at the budget, through the budget task force already, a rubric and a criteria system that had high, medium, and lows. And we altered that to fit what North's needs are. And we applied and discussed, and as Renee said, in some cases we kind of went back and forth on those impacts. So this is a sample of the chart that we have used. You can see at the top we have the impact on institutional work, impact on our students, impact on employees, and then we talked about equity through all of this, the potential to address inequitable practices. On the left-hand side were the areas that did the questions, and then the discussions occurred. And we wrote notes. Thank you to Annie from the President's Office, who took all of our discussions and then placed it into the chart. And you will see sometimes that we didn't have the same, like we were on like medium high or high medium, and so there were really deep discussions here to get to this point. So that is how we used the rubric and the criteria to discuss the impacts of like what they are representing to us. I think that's all I have to say about that. Again, this was a guide that informed us about how we were going to move forward with our recommendations.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mary Nash. And I'll make this closing point about how we plan to move forward with racial equity. I'll say to Terrence's point throughout this whole presentation, reminding us as a BAC committee that we are a recommendation body and also to be the voices for the community. But this whole process was very much emerging throughout. So we understand that what our recommendations may not have fit what we have uncovered now, which may be even more so as we get through. So we ask that you all take these recommendations, but apply them to if we have to have 15, 20, 25 and moving forward. So thank you for that. How do we plan to lead with racial equity? So for example, what we have provided now for all budget managers to truly understand when you now make the final decisions of your areas, that you take the recommendations that you all have recommended, apply them in this area, answer these 3 questions here, and we'll submit this to you all. And once you answer a question, for example, what does the data tell us about how these communities of color and low economic communities are faring during the budgetary decisions and the process? When you can answer these questions as you're making these decisions, and then you get through your final budgetary decisions, then you can understand and actually use a tool that can really help you make true decisions, not just off of the numbers, but also making sure that we lead with equity. So we'll have that in there. This is a document for everyone to go. But once again, we want to thank you all for your time as a committee. But then most importantly, thank you to the president and the VPs for allowing us to truly add this component and really have the conversation on how we do this and do it with an equity lens. So thank you.
And thank you to the BAC committee for all of your work. I know this was tough. You had some things to discuss, and it's my understanding you did a great job on behalf of those you're representing. I just want to remind everyone that if you want to save the chat, you have to do so manually. And this, as all of these have been recorded, so we will be forwarding the recording out probably in a few days, as before. And we just want to thank you all so much for participating, and know that we're going to do this again, but we're going to do this after, when we start talking about the structure of North and the structure of the district and what we're looking at, and we will be seeking your input as well. So thank you for attending, and have a great rest of the day.